I was standing on that stage, cap and gown heavy on my shoulders, my hands shaking as I held the diploma. The diploma my brother should have held decades ago. The crowd was cheering, flashes from cameras lit the room, but all I could see was his face, the day he gave it all up for me, the day he walked away from his own future so I could have mine. And in that moment, as I finally kept the vow that had haunted me for a lifetime, I realized something. This wasn't just about a piece of paper. It was about love, sacrifice, and the promise between two brothers that had carried me through every failure, every humiliation, every sleepless night until now. I still remember the night everything changed. Even though decades have passed, the memory is carved into me like it happened yesterday. The street was quiet, the air heavy, and inside our small house, my parents sat us down with solemn faces. They said we could only afford to send one of us to college. Just one. And that moment split my life in two. My brother and I had always dreamed together. We planned our futures late at night, whispering in the dark about where we would go, what we would become. But now reality had come knocking, and it wasn't kind. I sat there frozen, my heart racing, and before I could even open my mouth, my brother spoke, his voice steady, calm. He said, "Let him go. Let him be the one." "I'll stay," my parents protested. They said they couldn't choose, but he insisted. Said I had better grades, more potential, that I deserved the chance. And just like that, he handed over his dream and walked away from the future he had built in his heart. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I had stolen something sacred, like I had committed a crime I didn't even understand. And in that moment, the weight of his sacrifice crashed down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look him in the eye. People in town started whispering, saying I was the lucky one, the chosen one. But all I felt was shame, deep and burning, because I knew I didn't earn it. It was given to me at a cost I could never repay. That night, I stood alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, and I made a vow, not out loud, not to anyone else, but deep in my soul. I promised that one day I would finish what he started, I would walk the path he gave up, and I would make it count. I would get that degree. I would build a life that honored his sacrifice, and no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost me, I would never let his dream die just because it became mine. It wasn't just a promise, it was a fire lit inside me. A burden I accepted willingly, because in my mind that was the only way to live with what he had done, the only way to make it right. But I didn't know then how heavy it would become, how it would follow me like a shadow through every chapter of my life, how it would test me, break me, and in the end, define me. That night marked the beginning, not of my success, but of a vow that would take decades to fulfill, a vow that would demand everything I had and more. And as I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, I whispered to myself, "I'll do it for you, brother. I'll do it, if it kills me." Years passed, but the vow never left me. It followed me like a shadow, heavy, constant, pressing down, no matter where I went. At first I thought time would make it easier, that maybe the sharp edges of that night would soften, but they didn't. If anything, they grew sharper, cutting deeper, the older I became. I went to college, the very place my brother should have gone. And every lecture, every exam, every book I opened reminded me of him. I would see other students laughing, chasing their dreams freely, and instead of feeling inspired, I felt guilty because I was sitting in a seat that never should have been mine alone. Some days I pushed myself hard, determined to honor my vow. Other days I drifted lost in doubt, weighed down by a voice in my head whispering, "You'll never make it, you'll never be enough." And slowly that vow, instead of lifting me, began to crush me. turning into a burden I couldn't escape. Friends noticed. They would ask why I was always serious, why I never joined the fun, but how could I explain, how could I tell them that every laugh felt stolen, that every moment of joy reminded me of what my brother had given up? So I pulled away, I stopped joining, I stopped sharing, I started building walls around myself. My family saw it too. My parents tried to comfort me. They said, "Son, you don't need to carry this forever. What's done is done. Live your life." But their words only made me feel more alone because they didn't understand. They couldn't understand to me this wasn't just about opportunity. It was about honor, about debt, about love, and I couldn't walk away from it. With my brother, the distance grew even worse every time I saw him. I felt the vow pressing harder. I saw the life he should have had, and I felt smaller, weaker, ashamed. Sometimes he'd notice, he'd say, "You've been quiet, you, okay?" And I'd force a smile, nod, lie, "Yeah, I'm fine," but inside I was anything but fine. Inside I was drowning. I skipped classes, failed tests. I told myself I'd do better next time, but next time came and went. I carried the weight, but not the strength. And the more I failed, the heavier it grew, until I started to believe maybe I wasn't meant to keep the vow. Maybe it was too big for me. The vow was supposed to unite us to honor him, but instead it separated me. It separated me from my friends, from my family, from him, and most painfully, from myself. I became a stranger in my own skin, haunted by a promise I couldn't escape and terrified by the thought of breaking it. And as the years slipped by, I asked myself the same question over and over: how long can a man carry a vow before it breaks him? The years that followed tested me in ways I never saw coming. At first, I thought carrying the vow was the hardest part, but life has a way of piling weight on top of weight, and soon it wasn't just the vow pressing down on me, it was everything else I tried to build a life I really did. I took jobs that promised a future. I told myself I was climbing, but somehow every step seemed to crumble beneath me. Money slipped through my fingers faster than I could hold it. Bills stacked higher than I could pay. I would sit at the kitchen table late at night, head in my hands, staring at numbers that never added up. My vow whispered, "You can't quit, you can't fail," but failure was already staring me in the face. I remember the night I lost my job, the company downsized, and just like that, I was cut loose. I walked home under flickering streetlights, the same kind that lit the night of my vow, and I felt humiliation all over again. The world wasn't just against me. It was laughing at me. Friends drifted further away. Some offered pity. Others simply disappeared. And every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the man I wanted to be. I saw the boy who once stood helpless while his brother gave up his dream, the vow. Instead of lifting me up, dragged me deeper. I started questioning myself. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I wasn't meant to repay him. Maybe I was doomed to fail. There were nights when I sat alone with a bottle in my hand, staring into the emptiness, asking myself if it would be easier to just stop. No more guilt, no more failure, no more weight. But then his face would come back to me, that steady look in his eyes, the way he said, "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of this," and I couldn't do it. I couldn't betray him twice, once by letting him sacrifice, and again by throwing my life away. Still the damage was done. Stress carved lines into my face before their time. Sleep became a stranger. Food lost its taste, and with every failure the wall between me and my brother grew higher. One afternoon, he asked me, "How are you holding up?" And I forced a smile, nodded, said, "Yeah, I'm fine," then walked away before he could see the truth, because how could I tell him that the vow I made to honor him was slowly destroying me? My apartment grew emptier. One piece of furniture after another sold off just to survive, until the walls echoed with silence. I kept a small box by the door. Inside it, a photo of us as kids, two boys with wide eyes and wide dreams. And I would hold that photo at night and wonder what he would think if he saw me now. Broken, failing, drowning. Would he regret what he gave up? Would he wish he had chosen differently? Those thoughts cut me deeper than any failure. Rock bottom didn't arrive with drama, no grand crash, no sirens. It arrived quietly on a morning like any other. I woke up and realized I had nothing left but the vow, and even that felt like a chain around my neck. I sat on the floor back against the wall and asked myself the question I had avoided for years. What if I can't do it? What if I never make it right? The silence that followed was louder than any answer, and in that silence I realized I was standing on the edge, one step away from losing everything, including myself. It happened on a day I least expected, after months of silence inside myself, after nights that felt endless. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee that had gone cold, when I heard small footsteps behind me. It was my son. He climbed onto the chair across from me, swinging his legs, looking at me with those clear eyes. Children have eyes untouched by shame or failure, and he asked, "Dad, is it true Uncle gave up college so you could go?" The question froze me.
I couldn't breathe for a moment. How did he know? Who told him? Maybe he overheard whispers from family. Maybe it was a story my wife let slip. But his words hit me like a wave. My throat tightened. I managed to nod and say, "Yeah, it's true. Your uncle made a sacrifice. He gave me a chance." And then my son tilted his head, his face full of innocence, and said, "So does that mean you'll finish it for him? You'll make it right?" And in that instant, I felt the vow roar back to life. Louder than it had in years, his voice echoing inside me like thunder. I excused myself, walked into the other room, leaned against the wall, my legs weak, my heart pounding. I realized then that the vow was no longer just between me and my brother. It had crossed into the next generation. My son was watching. He would grow up knowing whether I kept my word or broke it, and if I failed, he would learn that promises mean nothing. I couldn't let that happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table with the old photo of me and my brother. As boys, I whispered to it, "I won't run anymore, I won't hide. It's time." And for the first time in years, the vow didn't feel like a chain. It felt like fuel. The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I hadn't felt in decades. Nothing in my circumstances had changed. The bills were still there, the doubts still whispered, but something in me shifted. I grabbed a notebook and wrote 3 words. "Start from here." I made a list.
Small steps? Things I could control, things I could do, not tomorrow, not next year, but today. I started with simple acts, showing up on time, taking jobs, no matter how small, enrolling again in night classes, sitting in those rooms, surrounded by younger faces, feeling the sting of shame, but refusing to walk out. Every page I read, every lecture I endured, every note I scribbled, felt like one stone laid on a broken path. I was determined to rebuild. My son would see me stumble, but he would also see me stand again, and that mattered more than anything. My brother noticed the change. At first he didn't say a word, but he watched me, his eyes softer than before. One evening, as we fixed a broken fence together, he finally said, "You seem different." I looked at him, and for once I didn't feel the wall of shame. I felt steady. I told him I remembered why. I can't quit. He didn't press, he just nodded as if he already knew. But it wasn't easy. The road was still steep. Doubt still crawled into my chest at night. Fear still whispered, "You'll fail again." But now I had something stronger. I had my son's voice. I had my brother's sacrifice. I had the fire of a vow that refused to die. And I swore to myself, this time I won't stop. No matter how hard, no matter how long, I will finish this. Looking back, that small visit, that simple question from my son became the turning point. It was the spark that lit the fire again. The reminder that vows don't die with time, they live as long as we give them breath. And that night, I breathed life back into mine, deciding once and for all that I would fight not someday, not when life was easier, but now. The morning after that turning point, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet determination, not loud, not dramatic, just steady like a current running beneath my skin. I knew the road ahead was long and brutal, but for the first time I believed it was possible. I sat down at the table with a blank notebook and wrote 3 words at the top. Start from here. No grand speech, no elaborate plan, just a beginning. And I began listing steps, small steps, things I could control, things I could do right away. And in that moment, the vow shifted from being a chain to being a map. The first step was simple. Show up. No matter how broken I felt, no matter how tired, I would show up to class, to work, to my own reflection. And that act alone started to change me. I signed up for night courses, surrounded by kids 10 years younger than me. Their energy made me feel out of place. But I stayed, I listened, I wrote notes until my fingers cramped. I forced myself to answer questions, even when my voice shook. Every page I turned, every lecture I sat through, I reminded myself this is one more brick, laid one more step toward keeping the vow. By day, I worked any job I could find, hauling boxes, washing dishes, fixing roofs, whatever paid. And at night, I studied, sometimes too exhausted to keep my eyes open, but I pushed through. I cut corners on everything else, packed my own lunches, wore the same pair of shoes until they tore, saved every spare coin in a jar on the counter. The jar grew slowly, but watching it fill was like watching hope take shape, tangible, undeniable. My son would sometimes sit beside me while I studied, his small hand resting on my arm, asking, "Dad, what are you reading?" And I would smile and explain, even if he didn't understand, because I wanted him to see me fighting, not hiding. I wanted him to know that men don't quit. Just because life gets hard, they rebuild. They rise again. My brother began to notice. He didn't say much at first, but I could see it in his eyes, the way he watched me one evening while we worked together, fixing an old shed. He said, "You've changed," and I answered, "No, I just remembered who I was supposed to be." He gave me a rare smile, then a genuine one, and I felt something break inside me, the wall between us beginning to crack. Still, the journey was brutal. There were nights I wanted to collapse, mornings I didn't want to rise, moments when doubt screamed louder than resolve, but I clung to the vow, to my son's voice, to my brother's sacrifice, and each time I fell, I forced myself to rise again, telling myself this is how a man rebuilds, not by never falling, but by refusing to stay down. Months blurred into years. Progress was slow, painfully slow, but it was progress. My grades improved, my savings grew. My confidence began to return. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming the man I was meant to be. And though I wasn't finished yet, I could finally see the outline of the vow I had carried for so long, taking shape before my eyes. It no longer felt like a weight dragging me down. It felt like a road leading me forward, and for the first time in decades, I was walking it with my head held high. The day finally came when the vow was no longer just a promise carved into my chest, but a reality I could hold in my hands. I had worked for years, grinding through long nights and longer days, clawing my way back from every failure, every doubt. And there I stood, dressed in cap and gown, clutching the diploma that represented not just my achievement, but my brother's sacrifice. The crowd was cheering, flashes from cameras lit the air, but all I could see was him, standing at the edge of the stage, older now, lines carved into his face, years of quiet sacrifice etched into his eyes. I stepped down, walked straight to him, and placed the diploma in his hands, my voice shaking as I said, "This is yours, it always was." He froze, his eyes wide, his lips trembling. He looked at the paper, then at me, and whispered, "You really did it." My throat tightened. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to tell him everything about the nights I nearly gave up, the mornings I rose anyway, the weight that almost crushed me, the silence that nearly killed me. But all I managed was a broken sentence. "I owed you this. I always owed you this." He shook his head, tears streaming, and said, "You never owed me anything. I made my choice, but thank you. Thank you for not forgetting." Those words, simple as they were, broke something open inside me. The guilt I had carried for decades, the shame that had eaten away at me, began to loosen its grip. And for the first time I felt peace, not because the past was erased, but because it finally had meaning. His sacrifice had not been wasted. My vow had not been empty. My son was there too, sitting in the audience, watching it unfold. And when he saw me embrace my brother, he smiled, that kind of smile children have when they see that promises are real, that words can be trusted. And I realized in that moment I wasn't just healing for myself, I was healing for him too, showing him that a man keeps his word no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it is. As I held my brother close, I felt lighter than I had in decades, like I could finally breathe again, like the vow that once chained me had turned into wings, carrying me back to him, back to myself, back to my family. The vow had broken me, yes, but it had also rebuilt me, and standing there I understood. It was never just about paying him back, it was about love, loyalty, and the bond between us that time and hardship could never destroy. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone with the diploma on the table. The house quiet, and I whispered to the boy I once was, the boy who felt humiliated, lost, drowning. I whispered, "Hold on, it's worth it, one day. This vow will save you." And I closed my eyes with a heart no longer heavy, but whole, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of evening when the air feels softer, when the light fades slow, and the world seems to breathe. I had invited everyone over, my brother, my parents, my wife, my son, a few close friends, not for a celebration with noise and fanfare, but for something quieter, something real, a gathering that marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another. I stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot, the smell of food filling the air. And for the first time in so many years, I felt content, not because everything was perfect, but because we had survived, because we had rebuilt, because we had healed. My brother arrived. First, he stepped through the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Then he smiled, not the guarded smile he wore so often, but a genuine one, warm and unburdened. We embraced, no words needed, just two men who had carried each other in silence, finally finding peace. Soon the table was full. Dishes clattered, voices overlapped. My son laughed as he carried plates. My parents sat side by side, watching quietly, their eyes shining with relief. The sound in that room was unlike any sound I had heard in years. It was alive, it was whole, it was family. As we ate, my brother raised his glass, his voice steady. He said to promises kept, to sacrifices that mattered to family, that never gave up. And everyone lifted their glasses. I felt tears rise, but I didn't hide them. I let them fall. Because they weren't tears of shame anymore, they were tears of gratitude. After dinner we sat together telling stories, some old, some new. and for the first time the vow didn't feel like a chain pressing on my chest. It felt like a foundation beneath my feet, strong and steady. I looked at my son and saw him watching, listening, and I knew he understood promises matter, sacrifices matter, love matters. And I felt proud, not just for myself, but for what I had passed on to him. Later that night, when the house grew quiet and everyone had gone, I stood at the doorway, watching the streetlights glow. My brother was the last to leave. He turned, pulled me into one more embrace and whispered, "I'm proud of you." And those words, simple as they were, healed wounds deeper than I had even realized. They closed a circle that had begun so many years ago when he first gave up his dream. And as I stood there, I knew we were no longer defined by what was lost, but by what we had rebuilt. When I finally sat back at the table, the dishes still scattered, the chairs still warm from those who had filled them, I let myself breathe, slow and deep. I thought about the boy I once was, humiliated and lost, and the man I had become, scarred but whole. The vow was complete, but its legacy would live on. Not as a burden, but as a story my son would tell his children one day. About his father and his uncle, about sacrifice and redemption, about how a promise kept can heal not just a man, but an entire family. That night, I went to bed with my heart full, not heavy, but full, and I closed my eyes, knowing tomorrow would come as it always does, but tomorrow no longer scared me because I had faced the weight of the vow, and I had kept it. Tomorrow was no longer a threat, it was a gift, and I welcomed it with open hands.